I should have known better than to expect applause. That's the first lesson I ever learned in this family. Camilla gets standing ovations for breathing, and I get polite nods for breaking my back. That night was no different. There I was, still in my stupid blazer from the awards ceremony, my second place trophy for the regional science fair tucked under my arm like some shameful secret. Second place. Not even worth a photo on the fridge, apparently. The house was lit up like a damn concert hall when I walked in, laughter spilling from the dining room, the clink of wine glasses, Mum's voice pitching high with that special tone she reserves only for Camilla's achievements. I paused in the hallway, my fingers tightening around the cheap plastic trophy. Maybe this time, just once, someone would glance up and say, "Hey, how'd it go?" Spoiler alert, no one did. I rounded the corner and there they were. Mum, Dad, Aunt Lydia, even Grandma, all crowded around Camilla like she'd single-handedly cured cancer. And in a way, to them, she had. She'd landed some fancy internship at a PR firm, the kind with a waiting list longer than the Bible, and, of course, she'd just happened to be the one they couldn't say no to. Never mind that I'd spent 3 months debugging my robotics project until my hand shook, or that the judge had pulled me aside and said, "You were this close to first." None of that mattered here. Camilla caught my eye over Dad's shoulder and flashed me a smile, the kind that's all teeth, no warmth. "Oh, Eleanor, you're back!" As if I'd been gone for weeks instead of hours, as if she hadn't known where I was. Mum finally turned, her gaze flickering to the trophy in my hand for half a second before she beamed at me. "Sweetheart, set that thing down and come celebrate. Camilla got the Sterling and Grant internship. That thing, like it was a grocery list I'd forgotten to put away." I forced a smile. What else could I do? And slid the trophy onto the counter. It toppled over immediately, landing next to a half-eaten platter of brie. No one noticed. Camilla was already back to holding court, tossing her hair over one shoulder as she sighed. I almost didn't apply. It's such a competitive environment, you know? Dad nodded like she'd just revealed the meaning of life. I leaned against the fridge, watching them. This was the script we'd been following since birth. Camilla shone, I faded. Camilla was the masterpiece, I was the pencil sketch you tossed in the drawer. And the worst part, I used to think if I just worked harder, if I just won bigger, they'd finally see me. But as I stood there, staring at my reflection in the microwave door, tired eyes, messy bun, a stupid ribbon still pinned to my blazer, it hit me. They never would. And that was the day I stopped waiting for them to look up. I first met Daniel at one of Camilla's infamous pool parties, the kind where she'd strategically invite just enough people to feel exclusive, but not enough to dilute her spotlight. He was all sun-bleached hair and easy grins, the kind of guy who laughed too loud at his own jokes, but somehow made it charming. I barely spoke to him that day, too busy being the designated towel fetcher while Camilla held court on the diving board. But then she started dating him and suddenly I existed again, as a prop in her drama. "Elena, be a doll and grab us drinks." "Eleanor, you don't mind if we take your car, right? Ours is full." And Daniel, poor idiot, would just shrug at me like, "What can you do?" as if Camilla's whims were forces of nature. Then came the text. The first time my phone buzzed at 2 a.m, I thought it was a wrong number. But no, just Daniel slurring through pixels. "You up? Cam's being weird, LOL?" I deleted it. The next night, she said, "You hate me," followed by a screenshot of Camilla's rant about how I was obsessed with him. Me, the girl who'd literally hidden in the pantry at Thanksgiving to avoid small talk with him. I should have known then. But denial is a hell of a drug when you're raised to believe your sister's tears are gospel. The breakup happened on a Tuesday. Camilla stormed into my room, mascara streaked like war paint, and hissed, "Happy now?" Before I could ask what fresh delusion this was, She'd already spun the tale for Mum. Elena's been whispering shit about me to Daniel. He dumped me because she poisoned him against me. Mum didn't even look at me. Just sighed. Elena, why can't you ever be happy for her? Daniel vanished after that. Ghosted us both. But the narrative stuck. I was the jealous sister, the saboteur. Never mind that Camilla had spent weeks accidentally leaving his DMs open on my laptop, or that she'd staged a fight with him in front of my bedroom door the night before they split. Facts didn't matter, only her story did. And that's when I realised, in this family, truth wasn't something you discovered. It was something Camilla assigned. The kicker? Years later, I ran into Daniel at a coffee shop. He bought me a latte and said, "Man, your sister was unhinged." I almost laughed, but what was the point? The damage was already done. And Camilla, she'd already moved on to stealing bigger things. I should have recognised the signs. The way Mark's eyes lingered just a beat too long when Camilla laughed, that throaty, performative sound she'd perfected in high school. The way he'd suddenly start texting mid-conversation with me, his thumbs flying while his mouth curled into a private smile. But no, I was too busy planning our future. Mark proposed on a rainy Tuesday with a ring he'd spent months saving for, or so he claimed. It was modest, tasteful, the kind of ring you choose when you genuinely think about the woman wearing it every day. I said yes because he made me feel chosen, a novelty in my family. Camilla's campaign began subtly. A forgotten scarf left in his car. A spontaneous lunch date where she just happened to be near his office. Then came the late-night calls. Emergencies only he could solve. A flat tire, a broken lock. A sudden existential crisis about her career that required his legal expertise at midnight. I confronted him once, my voice carefully neutral. "She calls you a lot." He shrugged. "She's your sister. What am I supposed to do, ignore her?" The night everything unravelled, we were at my parents' anniversary dinner. Camilla arrived late in a dress that clung like a second skin, her lips stained the exact shade of red I'd worn the night Mark proposed. She slid into the seat beside him, her knee brushing his under the table as she leaned in to taste his wine. I watched his Adam's apple bob as she licked the rim. 2 weeks later, he sat on our couch, twisting, that modest ring between his fingers. "I think we need to press pause," he said like our relationship was a streaming service. "Love isn't something you can schedule, Eleanor. It just happens." It happened all right. Right into Camilla's bed. I found out through Instagram a blurry photo of her hand on his chest, my diamond glittering on her finger. The caption, "When you stop looking and it finds you anyway." Our mother's comment sat proudly at the top. "Finally, someone worthy of you." The funeral for our relationship was held without me. No eulogies for the 2 years I'd wasted. No mourning the future I'd mapped out. Just a seamless transition. My fiancé became her +1 at family gatherings, my ring now a trophy on her finger. When I asked Mark why, really why, he had the audacity to look wounded. "You're making this ugly," he said. "Love isn't about possession." There's a special kind of violence in how quickly they rearranged reality to accommodate Camilla's latest conquest. No awkward transition period, no hushed whispers behind closed doors, just a seamless rewriting of history where Mark had always been destined for her. I walked into Sunday brunch exactly 1 week after the Instagram announcement, my stomach coiled tight enough to snap. They were already seated around the table, Camilla glowing like she'd single-handedly invented monogamy, Mark looking uncomfortably pleased with himself, and our parents beaming like they'd just witnessed a miracle. My chair was gone. Not metaphorically, literally, missing from its usual spot between Dad and Grandma. A place setting had been added at the other end of the table, wedged between Aunt Carol's perfume cloud and the swinging kitchen door. Mum didn't even glance up from slicing Camilla's avocado toast. "Oh, Elena, you're here. We weren't sure you'd come." Her tone suggested I was the one who'd committed the social faux pas. Camilla stretched her left hand across the table to pour orange juice, the diamond catching the light with every calculated movement. "We were just telling everyone how it happened," she sighed, as if recounting some divine prophecy rather than the emotional heist she'd pulled. "Mark and I kept fighting it. But when love is this real..." Dad actually teared up. I watched as he reached across the table to clasp Mark's shoulder, the same way he'd done when we announced our engagement. "We always hoped," he said thickly, and that's when the truth detonated in my chest. They'd been rooting for this. Maybe not consciously, but in that quiet, shameful way families nurture their favourites. The toast began. To Camilla's radiant smile, to Mark's courage in following his heart, to the unexpected beauty of second chances. When the champagne made its way to me, I raised my glass too. "To love," I said, watching Camilla's smirk falter when my voice didn't crack. "May it always land exactly where it belongs." The silence that followed tasted sweeter than anything on that table. I left before dessert, stepping out into the afternoon sun with my hands steady for the first time in weeks. Their betrayal wasn't a knife to the back. It was the surgical removal of my last delusion. Now I could finally stop bleeding for people who'd never once brought bandages. Packing my life into 3 suitcases took less time than I'd imagined. That's the funny thing about realizing you're fundamentally alone. Suddenly, all the sentimental clutter loses its weight. The framed photos, the birthday cards signed with perfunctory love, the sweater Mum bought me that still had the tags on because it was more Camilla's colour. I left them all stacked neatly on the dresser like artefacts from someone else's life. The note I wrote was deliberately bland. "Taking a job opportunity in Chicago. Will be in touch." Not a lie, but not the truth either. The startup incubator had been emailing me for months, their offer buried beneath Camilla's wedding venue brochures that kept arriving at my apartment. Mark's apartment. Whatever. I waited until 3:17 a.m. to leave, the exact time Camilla was born according to family law. Poetic justice, if I'd still believed in justice. The Uber driver didn't ask why a young woman was hauling luggage into his Toyota Camry in the dead of night. Maybe he'd seen this story before. Chicago greeted me with sleet and anonymity. My new apartment smelled like bleach and possibility, the kind of place where ghosts couldn't find you. I changed my number before I even unpacked my toothbrush. Not out of spite, out of survival. Every unread message from them had become a landmine, every call a grenade with the pin already pulled. Work became my alibi. 12-hour days coding in a shared office space where no one knew my last name, let alone my sister's. I stopped wearing makeup, stopped checking mirrors, stopped wondering if I was pretty or pale or tired looking. The only eyes on me belonged to investors scanning my pitch deck, and their gazes held none of the old familiar disappointment. 3 months in, I got word from a college friend that Camilla and Mark had postponed their wedding. "Some drama about the venue," she texted, then immediately followed up with, "Wait, should I not be telling you this?" I deleted the thread without responding. Let them drown in their own theatrics. The first Christmas came and went without a single Merry Christmas text going unanswered because I'd blocked them all in September. I spent the day eating Thai takeout and debugging an algorithm that would eventually make me richer than my father ever dreamed of being. The silence was the greatest gift I'd ever given myself. When the nightmares came, and they did, vivid scenes of walking into family gatherings where no one recognised me, I'd roll over and watch the sunrise paint my empty apartment in colours no one could ruin. This was the trade. Their love for my peace. I'd gotten the better deal. The incubator's checks barely covered rent and ramen, but I stretched each dollar until it screamed. My office was a corner booth at a 24-hour diner where the waitresses stopped charging me for coffee refills after week 3. I coded until my vision blurred, surviving on adrenaline and the quiet terror of failure. This wasn't just work. It was penance for every time I'd let them make me small. Investors laughed in my face that first year. "Ethical AI?" One Silicon Valley suit sneered, swirling his $15 cold brew. "Sweetheart, ethics don't scale." His eyes flickered to my empty ring finger, that universal symbol for too emotional to be rational, before cutting the meeting short. I walked back to my apartment in the rain that day, mascara bleeding down my cheeks like war paint. The breakthrough came at 4 a.m. on a Tuesday, my fingers stumbling across a solution so elegant it hurt. The algorithm worked. Really worked. Not the incremental progress my professors used to praise, but the kind of leap that makes tech journalists salivate. I sat there shaking, staring at lines of code that would have made my thesis advisor weep, with no one to tell but the flickering streetlight outside my window. Money started trickling in, then pouring. I hired my first employee, a brilliant MIT dropout who asked 0 personal questions. Then a team of 10. We moved from the diner to a real office with chairs that didn't smell like stale fry oil. I bought a proper winter coat instead of layering 3 cardigans. Started sleeping 5 hours instead of 2. The nightmares didn't stop, but they changed. Now I dreamed of walking into boardrooms where everyone stood to applaud, only to open my mouth and realise I'd forgotten how to speak. I'd wake gasping, fingers clutching at sheets that no longer smelled like my childhood home. Progress, it turned out, could ache as much as loss. When Forbes came knocking for their 30 under 30 inches feature, I almost declined. Then I saw the photographer's test shot, my reflection in the glass conference room wall, all sharp edges and steady gaze, and recognised someone new, someone who didn't flinch at her own shadow. The article called me the quiet storm disrupting Silicon Valley. They never mentioned my family. Why would they? I wasn't Camilla's sister anymore. I was the storm. The Tech Future Summit was supposed to be just another networking chore, another room full of men explaining my own industry to me while subtly scanning for a wedding ring. I'd perfected the art of navigating these events. Polite smiles, strategic exits, and keeping my champagne flute full enough to avoid refills, but empty enough to dodge drink tickets. Then he walked in. Lucas Carter didn't enter rooms so much as recalibrate them. The murmurs started before I even turned my head. That's Carter, the quantum computing guy. No, the private spaceflight Carter. The billionaire Carter, as if the universe needed 3 tries to contain him. He was taller than I expected, his tailored suit doing nothing to disguise the fact he'd clearly rather be in a lab. Our collision was literal. I'd been backing away from a venture capitalist's wandering hands when my heel caught on an Ethernet cable. Lucas caught my elbow with the reflexes of someone who'd spent years catching falling things. Prototypes, companies, maybe even people. "You're Elena Vasquez," not a question. His thumb brushed the edge of my conference badge before releasing me. "Read your white paper on algorithmic bias. Brilliant work." Most men led with my Wikipedia trivia, "Oh, you're the woman who turned down Google," as if my defiance was more interesting than my intellect. Lucas quoted my research like it was gospel. We argued for 47 minutes straight about neural network architectures. He was wrong, gloriously so, but his errors were fascinating, the kind only someone truly brilliant could make. When some silver-haired investor tried to interrupt with, Now, let's not get technical," Lucas didn't even glance away from me. "We're having a conversation. Find someone else to pitch your mediocre fund." I laughed so hard I snorted. He started showing up, at my favourite coffee shop the morning after the summit, outside my office building with 2 helmets and a Ducati, in the front row of my TED Talk, smirking at all the right moments. No flowers, no empty flattery, just a relentless curiosity about how my mind worked that felt more intimate than any touch. The first time I kissed him, it was because he just dismantled my fear of commitment with 3 sentences. "You're not afraid of love," he murmured against my temple. "You're afraid of being auditioned for a role you didn't choose. I don't want a performance." I broke 3 years of celibacy and half my kitchenware that night. When I woke at 3 a.m. to find him reading my old research notes instead of sleeping, I expected the familiar panic. He'll realise I'm not that smart, not that special. Instead, he pointed to a margin scribble and said, "This idea here, it could upend entire industries. Let's build it." No one had ever seen my rough drafts as blueprints before. By dawn, we'd incorporated a new company on his legal pad. By month's end, I'd moved into his penthouse, not because he asked, but because he'd turned his library into my dream workspace and said, "You shouldn't commute to Genius." The strangest part, he never once asked about my family, as if he already knew some stories don't deserve an audience. Lucas didn't court me in any traditional sense. There were no candlelit dinners or overpriced bouquets cluttering my workspace. Instead, he dismantled my defences, one calculated brick at a time. He remembered which brand of green tea made my migraines fade, kept a charger for my obsolete laptop model in his briefcase, and once flew across 3 time zones just to hand-deliver a sold-out component for my prototype. These weren't romantic gestures. They were tactical strikes against my independence. I resisted in ways both petty and profound. When he offered to introduce me to his contacts at NASA, I deliberately scheduled the meeting during his sister's wedding. When he programmed my coffee machine to make the perfect latte, at 6:15 a.m., I switched to drinking Earl Grey. He retaliated by learning exactly how long to steep the leaves. "You're exhausting," I told him after finding my favourite childhood pastry, ones I hadn't eaten since I was 12, waiting on my desk. His grin was unrepentant. "And you're predictable in your unpredictability." The real battle lines were drawn at night. Lucas slept like a man who'd never been betrayed, his breathing deep and even, one arm slung possessively over my waist. I'd lie awake counting his exhales, waiting for the other shoe to drop. Loving him felt like standing at the edge of a cliff, exhilarating until you realise one misstep could shatter you. My hesitation wasn't about trust. It was about identity. For years, I'd built myself into someone who didn't need anyone. Now, this infuriating man kept handing me parts of myself I'd forgotten existed. The girl who loved stargazing, the scientist who geeked out over quantum theory at 2 a.m, the woman who secretly wanted to be cherished. The breaking point came during a board meeting for our joint venture. An investor questioned my credentials, his tone dripping with the kind of condescension I'd grown accustomed to swallowing. Before I could respond, Lucas leaned back in his chair and said, "Interesting critique from someone whose biggest innovation is remembering to charge his Tesla." The room froze. Later, in the elevator, I turned on him. "I didn't need you to defend me." "I know," he said, punching the emergency stop button. The sudden silence was deafening. "But I needed to say it." His hands framed my face, calloused thumbs brushing my cheekbones. "Stop waiting for me to disappoint you, Eleanor. I'm not them." The kiss that followed wasn't gentle. It was a claiming, a challenge. I bit his lip hard enough to draw blood. He laughed against my mouth and kissed me deeper. When the elevator started moving again, my blouse was missing 2 buttons, and Lucas had my signature scrawled across his collar in berry red lipstick. We walked out together, my heels dangling from his fingers, my doubts scattered somewhere between the 14th and ground floors. That night, I fell asleep first, curled into his side, his heartbeat steady under my palm. No counting, no waiting. Just the quiet certainty that for once I wasn't the one who'd been left behind. The email hit my inbox at 3:47 a.m. on a Thursday, an anonymous tip with a leaked internal document attached. Some rival had fabricated chat logs, showing me admitting our AI had racial bias we'd chosen to ignore. The timestamps matched real meetings. The language sounded eerily like mine. It was a masterclass in character assassination, set to go viral at Market Open. My hand shook as I reached for my phone, but Lucas was already striding into my home office, wearing running shorts and a grim expression. "We've got 6 hours," he said, tossing me a protein bar. His contacts had clearly pinged him the moment the rumour hit the dark web. I expected him to take over, to start barking orders to his PR team or drafting damage control statements. Instead, he pulled up a chair and said, "Walk me through the code." For 3 frantic hours, we tore apart our algorithms line by line. Lucas didn't coddle me. He challenged every assumption, forcing me to articulate defences I hadn't realised I'd engineered. When we found the smoking gun, a manipulated screenshot that didn't match our actual testing protocols, he didn't celebrate. "They'll claim we doctored this," he muttered. "We need irrefutable proof." That's when I remembered the blockchain timestamping system I'd prototyped months ago. We spent the remaining hours compiling an immutable audit trail of every code change, every bias test, every ethical review. At 9:01 a.m, as the first hit piece went live, we counterattacked. Not with press releases, but with raw data. A public dashboard showing our AI's decision trees in real time, warts and all. Lucas's final touch: a $1 million bounty for anyone who could find unaddressed bias in our systems. The media frenzy was instantaneous. By noon, our transparency was being hailed as an industry benchmark. By dusk, the rival CEO was backtracking on Twitter. Lucas found me staring blankly at my monitor long after the storm had passed. "You knew," I said hoarsely. "You knew forcing me to fight would work better than fighting for me." He pressed a kiss to my knuckles, the same hands that had built us out of the fire. "I know how champions operate." That night, for the first time, I cried in front of him, not from pain, but from the terrifying realization that I'd found someone who made my strength feel safe instead of solitary. We chose a Tuesday because neither of us believed in lucky dates. The courthouse smelled like lemon polish and old paper, our footsteps echoing in the empty hallway. I wore a cream pantsuit I'd bought on clearance. Lucas had forgone a tie but kept his grandfather's pockets, watch tucked in his vest. No photographers, no guest list. Just a sleepy clerk and the judge who kept checking her smartwatch between sentences. When it came time for vows, Lucas produced 2 folded index cards from his breast pocket. "Stole these from your desk," he admitted, handing me one. Mine read, "I take you as my emergency contact," in his precise architect's handwriting. His card said, "I take you as my co-founder," in my messy scrawl. We laughed so hard the judge sighed. The reception was takeout sushi eaten on the rooftop of our building, the city lights blurring through my unshed tears. Lucas fed me a piece of Toro with his fingers, his thumb brushing my lower lip after. "No regrets?" he asked, though his eyes already knew the answer. I shook my head, the diamond band on my left hand catching the moonlight. A simple platinum loop he'd designed himself after studying my blueprints for weeks. Just surprised it took this long to make an honest woman out of me. His smile could have powered the Manhattan grid. "Had to wait for you to stop expecting betrayal?" The champagne stayed unopened. The cake was a single slice from our favourite bakery, shared with plastic forks. At midnight, we slow danced to a jazz playlist I'd made for coding marathons, his palm warm against the small of my back. No one toasted us. No one cried. And when the sun rose, the only proof we'd gotten married was the way his signature looked beside mine on the license. 2 stubborn lines finally converging. Camilla found out in the checkout line at Whole Foods, of all places. The magazine rack next to the organic kale chips displayed my face in glossy perfection. Forbes, Tech Titans Under 40 issue, my hand resting on Lucas' arm, his wedding band glinting under the studio lights. The headline screamed, "The Power Couple Reinventing Silicon Valley," in bold yellow letters. Her almond milk hit the floor with a splatter. I imagine her fingers trembling as she grabbed the magazine, her perfectly manicured nails leaving crescent marks in the cover. How her breath must have caught seeing Lucas's net worth printed in black and white, that obscene number even larger than our father's peak valuation. The article gushed about our storybook romance and disruptive genius, complete with photos of our Malibu beach house and quotes from Elon Musk calling us the future. Not one mention of her. The cashier later told TMZ that a beautiful woman in designer yoga pants had abandoned a full cart to sprint into the parking lot, shouting into her phone. By then, Camilla had already called our parents' landline 6 times, sent 17 texts to our cousin's husband who worked in finance, and Googled Lucas Carter wife with such ferocity her phone overheated. Mark confirmed it to her over a tense brunch, his voice carefully neutral. "Yeah, they got married last fall. Small ceremony." He didn't mention the prenup he'd helped me draft years ago, the one now collecting dust in some drawer, while I lived the life she'd assumed would be hers. Our mother's first voicemail arrived at 2:17 a.m. "Darling, we saw the wonderful news." Her voice dripped with the same saccharine tone she used when asking Camilla's exes to still get invited to the country club. "Why didn't you tell us? We're throwing a belated reception." I played it for Lucas over breakfast, both of us chewing our avocado toast to the soundtrack of her desperation. He didn't laugh, just slid his phone across the table showing a LinkedIn notification. "Robert Vasquez, your father, wants to connect." The butter knife left gouges in my toast as I imagined them gathered around their iPads, dissecting every pixel of my happiness like archaeologists studying an artifact. Camilla's wine glass shattering against the fireplace. Dad's nervous chuckle as he calculated how much bridge financing Lucas could provide. Mum rewriting history in real time. Eleanor was always the ambitious one. Lucas silenced the devices with one swipe. "They don't get to RSVP now." Outside, the California sun burned away the morning fog, the same sun that was just rising over my childhood home, illuminating the cracks in their perfect facade. I wondered if they finally felt it, the weight of being the ones left behind. My phone erupted like a dormant volcano, suddenly remembering its purpose. Calls from unknown numbers, stacked up like dominoes. The 212 area code of Dad's office, Mum's favourite spa's prefix, even Grandma's antique landline that hadn't dialed out since the Clinton administration. They came in waves. First, the faux casual reconnaissance. Cousin Marissa's Instagram DM. "OMG, just saw Forbes. We should catch up." Followed by a screenshot of my wedding photo with "This is you," scrawled in disbelieving purple ink. Then, the emotional artillery. Mum's handwritten letter arrived via courier. Thick ivory stationery smelling of her Chanel No. 5, the looping cursive detailing her sleepless nights, worrying about her estranged daughter. She included childhood photos of us baking cookies, carefully curated to exclude the frames where Camilla was shoving me out of shot. The nuclear option arrived on day 3. Camilla herself, standing in the lobby of our Manhattan office building in a white Valentino dress eerily similar to my courthouse pantsuit. The security feed showed her perfecting her vulnerable expression in the reflective elevator doors before being turned away at reception. "Miss Carter isn't available," our head of security informed her, the new name still giving me a thrill. "But I'm her sister," she protested, voice cracking on cue. "So were half the women who tried this yesterday." Lucas had our entire team prepped with responses sharper than Camilla's cheekbones. The florist sending roses got a terse no such recipient at this address. Dad's business proposal routed straight to legal with potential conflict of interest flags. And when Mark, poor predictable Mark, slid into my LinkedIn DMs offering "congratulations and maybe some catch-up drinks," Our junior associate replied with, "Just our prenup's infidelity," clause highlighted in yellow. The voicemails grew increasingly untethered from reality. Mum now remembered attending my imaginary childhood piano recitals. Dad referenced all those father-daughter talks we never had. But it was Camilla's final message that truly stunned me. A whispered, shaking "I miss you" that almost sounded genuine until I remembered she'd used that same breathy tone to steal my 8th grade boyfriend. I saved that one, not out of sentiment, but as a reminder, the most dangerous lies are the ones we almost believe. Lucas found me on the terrace that night, scrolling through the digital graveyard of their attempts. "Regretting the radio silence?" he asked, handing me a martini. I let the phone slip into the hot tub between us, bubbles obscuring the screen as it sank. I've never heard them more clearly. I let them book the private dining room at Le Bernardin. Let them arrange the floral centerpieces in my childhood favourites, gardenias and midnight blue delphiniums. Let them order the 1982 Lafite Rothschild from Dad's secret wine locker, the bottle he'd been saving for Camilla's wedding. The theatrics were almost endearing in their predictability. They stood when I entered, a synchronized show of respect that would have made me weep at 16. Now, it just made me want to light the tablecloth on fire. Camilla's hug lingered a second too long, her Diarissimo perfume triggering memories of stolen lipsticks and doctored report cards. "You look expensive," she breathed, fingers brushing the emerald-cut diamond at my throat. "I am," I said simply, taking the seat at the head of the table. The meal unfolded like a poorly scripted play. Mum's strained compliments about my little company, Dad's not-so-subtle hints about Carter Industries' supply chain needs, Camilla's performative tears over how much we've all grown. I let them talk, savouring each desperate volley like sips of their precious Bordeaux. It was Mark who finally cracked. "Jesus, Eleanor, just tell us what you want." His wedding band left sweaty prints on the tablecloth. The silence stretched as I dabbed my lips with the linen napkin. "I wanted you to see this," I said finally, gesturing to the opulent spread, the crystal glinting under chandeliers, their own hollowed-out expressions reflected in the silver. "To sit at a table where I'm the prize instead of the placeholder." Camilla's fork clattered against her gold-rimmed plate. "That's not fair," I finished. "No, but neither was leaving me in the ER with a broken wrist to attend your ballet recital." The cheque came with petit-four none of them touched. I signed it with my married name, the flourish of the C, slicing through the paper like a verdict. Lucas was waiting at the curb with the car running. "How'd the reunion go?" I slid in beside him, the scent of gardenias clinging to my sleeves. "They finally understand supply and demand." As we pulled away, I didn't look back. But for the first time, I knew they were watching. The penthouse elevator doors slid open to reveal Lucas barefoot in his lab, soldering iron in one hand and a half-eaten bagel in the other. The familiar scent of burnt coffee and ozone wrapped around me like a favourite sweater. He didn't ask about the dinner, just raised an eyebrow at my Louboutins dangling from my fingers. "That bad?" I dropped the shoes by the door where they'd leave scuff marks on the imported hardwood. Worse, Mum cried actual tears when I mentioned buying the house next door to theirs. His chuckle rumbled through me as he pulled me against his chest, his t-shirt absorbing the last traces of gardenia and pretense. We stood like that for a long moment, my ear pressed to the steady rhythm beneath his ribs, a metronome keeping time in a world that no longer spun around my family's whims. Later, wrapped in the ridiculous cashmere blanket Lucas kept for my migraines, I watched dawn break over Manhattan through floor-to-ceiling windows. The city glittered like the circuit boards we'd stayed up soldering last week, each light a connection we'd chosen to make. Somewhere across town, my parents were probably dissecting every word I'd said over lukewarm coffee. Camilla would be raging to Mark about unfairness. None of it touched me here. Lucas pressed a steaming mug into my hands, chamomile with exactly half a teaspoon of honey, the way I liked it when my nerves were frayed. Regrets. I thought of Dad's trembling hands as he poured the wine, Mum's desperate grip on my sleeve when I stood to leave, Camilla's hollow laugh when she realised no amount of flattery could rewrite our history. The ghosts of who we'd been to each other finally laid to rest. Just one. I turned my wedding band in the sunrise, watching light fracture through the platinum. That I didn't walk away sooner. His lips brushed my temple as the first proper rays painted the room gold. No cameras captured this moment. No headlines would trumpet it. Just two people who'd built something real from the rubble of other people's expectations, sipping tea in comfortable silence. Somewhere beyond these walls, the world kept turning. Families fractured and reformed, sisters schemed, parents pretended. But here, in this sliver of dawn, there was only one undeniable truth glowing brighter than any Forbes headline. I'd finally come home to myself.